I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm just so excited. Seven or so years ago when I got into miniature painting, there was a lot less paint brands on the market. It's kind of crazy to think about how many more options we have in such a short period of time. My favorite paint range almost since the beginning was P3, and even after more brands entered the market, there was always something unique to the P3 formula that I loved. Unfortunately, the range wasn't really supported at all, and it was really hard to come by, which made it really hard for me to justify using it in videos, seeing as you probably couldn't find it out in the wild. And I had just given up hope that the paint range was dead, at least until recently, when it was announced that Steamforged Games had acquired a number of assets from Privateer Press, including the P3 paint range. From what I'm told, they've been in the research and development process, trying to take the original formula, keeping it true to what made it so great, while upgrading it with the new technology of miniature paints that we see on the market. And Steamforged Games was kind enough to send me out this giant box filled with the latest iteration of the P3 range. And they let me know that this is very close to the final version that'll go live on Kickstarter next week. For the last 3 to 4 weeks, I've been painting exclusively with this paint, sometimes secretly in videos, and so now you know what that paint range was, and I'm now ready to share with you what I think this paint does better, what it does worse, and if it really holds true to that magical creamy P3 formula. And just like any time I do an in-depth breakdown of a new paint range, this video is not sponsored by Steamforged Games in any way. With the new Warhammer 40k Blood Angel set out, I just thought I needed to paint this new Lamarty's figure. He looks badass to me, so I'll be running through him while we test out the paint range. But I'll also be showing you footage of other figures I've been testing out this paint range with throughout the video. Oh yeah, and by mentioning Space Marines, it reminds me that I am actually giving away this custom special edition decaled version of the new Radeon video card to celebrate the launching of Space Marine 2. A big thank you to Focus Entertainment for sending me over this video card, because that means I get to send it on to you. If you want to get in the drawing, all you have to do is subscribe to my channel and leave a comment down below. I will draw a winner 10 days from the release of this video, and I will send you out the card. All right, let's break into this paint. Now, the original thing that P3 had that was so unique to that range was that it acted like most other miniature paints. However, it had this extra gear. Its creamy, smooth texture directly out of the bottle, combined with a longer working time, meant that you could create smooth blends of 2 colors right on the model without worrying about the paint drying too fast or leaving behind a nasty texture. You could also place a bit of undiluted paint right on the model, then quickly clean your brush and feather out that paint to create a smooth fade for highlights and shadows. The old paint range as a whole has plenty of faults, but this one unique factor that I couldn't find anywhere else, even as new paint ranges were released, really set this one apart, and I loved the original range because of it. And of course, you can wet blend and feather with any miniature paint, but this stuff, it feels like it was designed for that paint style. And the new range, well, it seems like this important point to the formula was not lost on Steamforged. The ability to do this blending in real time is absolutely still there. Now, the actual breakdown and consistency of this paint versus the old stuff is slightly different, but more importantly, it acts the same way on the surface of your model. It glides off your brush, and when one color meets another, they mix easily and smoothly, unlike some other paints where it feels like you got to do a lot of agitation to get the pigments to kind of mix together. And impressively, this ability to blend worked uniformly across the entire range, no matter which color I tried in the 60 plus in this box. And I realize that I may seem a little bit overexcited and fanboying about this one thing, but there's a reason why I'm starting with this factor. If this new paint couldn't seamlessly pull off this one most vital aspect of the old paint, this whole paint range kind of doesn't need to exist. But because it's able to do that, I'm now excited to dig into it and see how well this new range can deal with all the shortcomings the original range had. Now, one of the biggest improvements we've seen in miniature paints as a whole over the last decade is the consistency and coverage in pigmentation in our paints. Now, the original P3 paints was pretty terrible at this consistency level. About a third of the paints were amazing, about a third of the paints were decent, and about a third of the paints were absolutely horse shit when it came to their coverage. Seriously, some of these original paints should have never been made. But every paint I tested in the new range, which is about 60 by my last count, covered like a dream. The pigment load has been greatly increased across the board. It feels so good to be able to paint a light color over a dark and not need 5 coats to get full coverage. And this factor isn't just valuable for base coats. If you're doing any kind of detail work like edge highlighting or dotting of eyes, you need to slightly thin your paint. And because you're doing that, you're actually diluting it a bit. And if it doesn't have strong pigmentation, you're not going to get that cool, crisp edge that really defines the shape with that new color you just applied. We've all used paint with weak pigmentation before. There's a reason why we're always on the search for a good quality yellow paint, because they typically cover like garbage. But not this stuff. It really is strong pigmentation. So basically, P3 is now on par with the others that I use regularly. AK 3rd Generation, Pro Acryl, Army Painter Fanatics, and 2 thin coats. It's not better than those ranges, but quite frankly, it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be on their level, because all of those ranges cover really, really well, and they're really solid paint ranges. And now I can say that P3 is as well. One thing I found myself thinking was how much they actually had to change this formula in order to make the pigmentation load really quality while still holding it true to that original creamy texture. And I appreciate that they put that much research and development into this, because I'm guessing that wasn't easy to accomplish. Or maybe it was. I don't know how paint is made, really. All right, next I want to talk about the paint range itself, because it feels like every paint range these days is either massive right when it launches, or they keep adding more expansions to make it an ungodly amount of paints that you end up needing to buy if you want to collect them all like Pokemon. And I know we all do. We're miniature painters. We have to have every paint in every set that we own one paint of. This is our sickness. Now, if you want to own a single paint range that'll have a wide range of every possible color you want to paint with, then P3 is probably not the range for you. There's only about 80-ish colors, maybe 90 in the full original set, and as far as I understand, they're holding true to that paint range size for this one. That sounds like included with the 80-ish colors here, you'll also have a wide range of metallics, plus these fancy new washes that they're talking about that I haven't tried yet. One thing that I always really did like about the P3 paint range, especially as I was a newer painter, was because it was smaller and it had a bunch of weird, unique colors that I found myself trying out colors that I was less comfortable with using. And I found colors that I really enjoyed and stuck with me all these years later. I found that there are a lot of colors that I use all the time because they're so versatile, like coal black, bloodstone, and the wonderful Menoth white pear, and a number of browns, tans, and ochres. And then there's those colors that are really wild and unique that they're just so punchy and vibrant that I end up using them whenever I need that boost in a model, like their vibrant blues and their wonderful purples. A nice rich purple that's not too dark and not too desaturated is kind of a unicorn in miniature paint ranges. Honestly, there's very few out there that actually fit that bill. And the old beaten purple by P3 was a beautiful color, but its coverage was complete garbage. Now the coverage is amazing, and this will probably be my go-to purple for the foreseeable future. Hey, if you need new shirts and stuff, you better get them from Into the AM. Don't make the mistake I did and buy your underwear out of the trunk of a Buick from a guy in the Walmart parking lot. Some deals are too good to be true. That is all I'll say. But you know what's not too good to be true? The new Styles and Multi-Pack sale at Into the AM. Because I can't think of a better way to stretch my hard-earned dollar while looking sexy than supporting a company that takes pride in handcrafting clothes with the highest quality fabrics and eco-friendly inks. So whether you're going out frog gigging or taking your special lady friend on a fancy date to the Applebee's, you'll be looking fine as wine and no one knows your whole get-up was half off. Now I know what you're thinking, and yes, this is my hot date Into the AM flannel. Also doubles as my court date flannel. So be sure to use my cousin's link down in the video description and use code NINJA on at checkout to get an extra 10% off your entire order. And that's on top of the already on sale prices. Now you go on and get now. And click that link. Now in that giant box of paints they sent me, I did notice something. There were colors that were new in that box. There was an ice yellow and a couple of different variations of red umber. I'm guessing they're trying their best to create their very own Rhinox hide. This means that they've taken a good look at the range and they've identified gaps within it. And I really appreciate that because they want the range to be well-rounded. So if you buy that whole set, there's not any colors that you're really missing out on. One question I immediately asked myself when they announced that this paint range was going to be re-released was, were they going to keep the original pots or were they going to move over to dropper bottles? And they have announced through their Kickstarter that you are going to get the option, if you back the Kickstarter, whether you want new bottles or you want the old pots. This does feel a little bit like a cop-out to me. I mean, like, come on, Steamforge. You just plant your flag in the sand and pick one instead of just trying to make everybody happy. And quite frankly, the correct answer to the question, pots or dropper bottles, is obviously the old pots. Now hear me out. If you've ever had any pots, including the 20-year-old Games Workshop pots that are the exact same ones as these, I bet you that they still act the same as they did the day you bought them in 1993. That's because these things are the pinnacle of miniature paint container. They do not evaporate whatsoever. They will keep their consistency. Whatever is in here will stay in here. My final argument for pots versus dropper bottles is that if you just need a little bit of a color, you don't need to add an entire drop of it on your wet palette. With this stuff, you can just grab the tip of your brush, get that little bit of color, put it on the model, and you're not wasting all that extra paint. I do hope that they include agitators with all their pots and bottles. That seems to be industry standard right now, but I added them to my old P3 paints myself, and it helps. So the paint is creamy, it's blendable, it now acts universally across all the colors, so they have equal great coverage, and the range is staying fairly tight. But the other thing we really need to ask ourselves is, how well does this paint thin down? Because you know what, this hobby isn't a cheap one. So any paint that I buy must be flexible enough to not only give me clean, opaque layers, creamy blends, but also thin down to a heavy glaze or even a faint tinting. It used to be that this was an automatic home run for any miniature paint because they were already pretty weak in their pigmentation, so thinning them down just made them work nice and smoothly. But with the advent of pumping up pigmentation to ensure opaque layering, I've noticed that not every single paint range still thins down to glazes as well as it used to. Because these things are in such a tight suspension with a pumped up pigment load, if you add too much water, sometimes you'll get separation or the thinned paint doesn't distribute evenly smoothly across the surface of the model. But I'm happy to say that the new P3 paint range thins down wonderfully, especially all the vibrant and darker colors, because as we know, glazing with light colors isn't really ideal in miniature painting. But with these dark colors, these things really apply smoothly, and I was able to get fine tints and even nice smooth color gradation through glazing. I'm going to show you one of the most impressive experiences I had with thin version of this paint in just a bit, but that means we're going to have to get over to talking about their metallics. And I'll admit here that I didn't use their old metallic range very much. They had that same thicker consistency as the rest of the range, and I'm not much of a fan of thick, goopy metallic paints. They also acted like old metallics, where the flake size was really large and it just felt really cheesy and heavy-handed. I will say that they had some really unique and very valuable colors in their metallic range. Specifically, Deathless Metal and Boiler Black were great colors to have in your metallic arsenal. I kind of held my breath as I tried out their new metallics, and they blew me away. These things are phenomenal. They are completely redone from the ground up. They're slightly thinner, they go on smooth right out of the bottle, and they have a very, very fine grind on their metallic flakes. I'm not sure if they use pure aluminum powder for this or they have some kind of aluminum blend, but they act very similarly to my favorite metallic on the market, Vallejo Metal Color. But they are slightly thicker, which I think is a good thing because this stuff is like water thin and it separates super easily. The new P3 stuff doesn't. Back to showcasing how well this paint thins down. I took a reddish skin tone, thinned it down to a glaze consistency, and washed the gold. I did the same with just a regular black for the silver, and they worked so well. They settle into the details, still holding their tone. They don't fade away like oftentimes you get with thinned down paints. Plus, you can use the same glaze to build up more shadows across different aspects of the metallics if you want a more display quality true metallic metal. Now, they must still be working on the full range of their metallics because they only sent me 4 bottles of it and none of them are super bright. So I ended up mixing in a little bit of Vallejo Metal Color aluminum to the base colors for my highlighting, and honestly, it worked so well. As I finish up Lamarty's here, I am now over 60 hours of direct use of only this paint range, and I gotta say, I freaking love this stuff. Now, I know you may say that I'm biased because I love the original P3 paint range, but I spent so much time with that range, I saw all the stuff that it sucked at. And I see how they addressed that. I see that now it doesn't have the faults it used to have. So yes, if you've tried the old P3 paint range and you didn't like it, well, if the coverage was crappy and that's why you didn't like it, you picked some of the bad colors. If you picked some of the great colors like Exile Blue and Coal Black and Bloodstone and you did not like that, you're not going to like this new paint because it does all those things the old range did, but more consistently and better. So yeah, obviously I love it, but let's rein it back here a bit and talk about the negatives of this paint range. First and foremost, it is yet another new paint range on an already oversaturated market of miniature paints. There are amazing paint ranges everywhere you look. Everywhere on my shelves, everywhere on your shelves, you have solid miniature paints. Do you need an entire another new paint range? You probably don't. Is that going to stop me? Hell no. I'm going to buy this one too. But just know that purchasing this paint range is not in and of itself going to make your models get painted faster or better. You're still going to be on the line for that part. Now it is a smaller paint range, so you're not going to have to spend as much money if you wanted to pick up the full thing or at least try a couple paints. And that leads me to our next point. Who is manufacturing this paint? Steamforged Games. That is a company that has their tendrils all over your local game stores in a variety of countries. That means your local game store probably already carries Steamforged Games. That means you're probably going to get full access to this paint range once it hits the retail market. I think accessibility is a major value to this paint range or any paint range. If I can't go buy a new bottle of black when I've used my old one without having to go through an ordering process and pay $1.50 in shipping for one bottle of paint, I'm less likely to use that range. But speaking of retail, that leads me to our final potential negative to this paint range, and that is the fact that it is launching via Kickstarter. I wish it was just available in my stores next week or next month, but instead it's being launched via Kickstarter next week. Now, there are some positives to that. That means that this paint range will get more exposure because Kickstarter is basically a vast marketing tool that allows these companies to produce things that maybe they otherwise wouldn't be able to do if they didn't have the vast backing of the Kickstarter force. So on one hand, Steamforged Games is a large company that they probably don't need to take this to Kickstarter, but on the other hand, they're also not a paint company. They haven't made paint before, and I know they have passionate people and experts in the team that focus on this now that they've acquired the P3 range, but they need to be reassured that this company feels that this is a long-term investment for them to carry this range. If you wanted to check out the Kickstarter or back it yourself, I'll put a link down in the video description. It goes live on September 10th. A big thank you for hanging out with me today, and don't forget to subscribe and put a comment down below so you get in the drawing for the video card. And if you like these videos and you want to support me to make more of them, you can always check out my affiliate links down in the video description. Many of those have great discounts, so you save money while supporting me. You can also pick up some Ninjon merch in my store. That supports me as well. And finally, you could join me over on the Ninjon Patreon. There's some fun rewards you get for supporting me over there, and honestly, I could not do this full time without the support of my amazing patrons. So seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta go back to work on the biggest, dumbest, space marinist project that I've ever done. And sometime between now and that next video, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.